Fortunate to have President Ali as our president. There is no other candidate in this race now who can so easily navigate very complex issues that are important for our country. You just have to listen to them. From some you get sloganeering, people-centered development. That's all you hear from them, but without being able to elaborate details. And then a whole series of promises that are not sustainable and would lead us to economic ruin. And then from others, it's just shortly and soon. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking back to 5 years ago when we had a similar exercise at the new driving restaurant just across the road. We were preparing our manifesto and we thought it important to include the voices of the people of this country. So we had originally planned the consultations for this hotel. And then APNU bullied the management of the hotel to cancel our event. And so we had to hold it at the new driving restaurant. But it wasn't the venue that mattered. It was the content and the participation. And I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be here today. And every word that you say, we will seriously consider your suggestions before we complete our manifesto. Now, you would have seen a document that we've circulated, and it's titled Commitments and then Additional Commitments. So over the past several years, we've been on the ground. We know what the people's issues are. And those commitments you see there are reflective of the concerns that we have encountered on the ground. And we've proposed the solutions. The solutions did not come just from the party. Came from a process that we started not just long ago, but more recently, when the party invited people through WhatsApp and a physical box at Freedom House to drop in their suggestions. I have with me a shortened version of all the suggestions we received. Over 2,000 persons took their time to make submissions. And we have over 5,000 submissions that we had to summarize that came from different individuals. Now, there was a lot of repetition, but we are grateful that they took their time and sent in those suggestions. So what we have here is we've invited more institutions to be here and different sectors of the economy, because we've had a widespread consultation through this means already. And some of the commitments you've seen on our flyer that will be taken to every home and that you have before you, those came out of that initial interactive process that we had. Today we are looking to elaborate on these and also to complete our manifesto, which will be launched sometime later this month. By the very nature, manifesto is a small document, so we will not be able to elaborate every plan that we have, because we've received submissions from the creative industries, from people living with disability, from those who are concerned about the carnage on our roads, a whole broad group of sectors and individuals and NGOs who have made excellent suggestions in a very detailed. We can't include all of these in our manifesto. We will speak about the broad heads in the manifesto, key policies, but do not think for a moment that we will not take into consideration the details of your submissions later. Because we can, if we were to include that, we'll have a manifesto listed. And a very thin one, APNU doesn't even want to read that, much less a big one if we give it to them. So so if you don't see every idea that you have reflected, know that there is a commitment to addressing these and elaborating plans. Even if you were to go back to 2020 and our promises there, we focused in the many promises we made, which we've all fulfilled. We specified what those promises are. So when we said we will reverse the taxes, 200 plus taxes, which we did, and it cost us $50 billion, and put $50 billion back in the pockets of people who had to pay those taxes. And when we said we will introduce no new taxes in the 5 years in office, which we promised, which we kept, those were vital promises that had to be implemented if we were going to reboot the economy, which was already suffering malaise on the 5 years under APNU because of the adverse policies, not just taxes, but other adverse policies. So that was a crucial promise. A promise to, for example, do 50,000 house lots was because there was no housing program. But when we promised world-class health care, we just put a broad head there. We did not elaborate in great details. But when we got into office, we elaborated an entire plan. Although we had just put a broad promise there, we elaborated the entire plan that included 12 new hospitals, the rehabilitation of all the remaining hospitals, the training of large numbers of healthcare personnel, recruiting people from abroad, ensuring that we have drugs in the hospital and medical supplies in the hospital, which was absent under APNU, that we started doing tertiary care once again. I don't want to elaborate everything. So here too, you're going to see maybe in the digital industry, where we've had the detailed submissions from the creative industry, you would see support for or incentivizing content creation and then protecting content created locally. But we're not going to detail every suggestion here because that could happen later. So if you don't, you submitted a 10-page document, you can't get all of it in the manifesto, but there's a strong commitment to addressing the issue there. And you will see the most important things addressed here. So the president focused a lot on important, very substantive issues. And often, the framework, and he touched the framework. He mentioned the low carbon development strategy, and he mentioned some macroeconomic management. And sometimes these things are overlooked because in our environment, where the politics is focused often on personalities and not policies, people tend to look at, evaluate you on promises. They don't think sustainability, they don't think framework. For us in the People's Progressive Party, we've always taught framework. We launched one of the first low carbon development strategies in the world. We had the NDS, nearly seven volumes of planning done in the 90s, thousands of pages that laid out almost in every sector of the economy what we wanted to achieve in the long run. And that is why when recently APNU tried to claim credit for the bypass road, we showed we had the route map since 2003. We had a consultant, the bypass from Oval to Eccles and the Mandela to Diamond and then to the airport. We had a high-span bridge across the Demerara River, the Berbice River, since in 1996, the year that we handed over the manifesto to Dr. Jagdeo. Not the manifesto, the MDS, the first draft of the MDS. We have consistently had a long vision of things. And that differentiates us from the other side. We don't have any vision, no plan, and that is why all you get are a series of unsustainable promises. So why did we need that long-term vision? Because the country was insolvent in 1992. Imagine a government taking office which, according to Carl Greenidge's own words, was faced with the debt overhang being 9 times the size of your economy, 913%, and having to use 153% of revenue to service debt. That was scheduled. When you got the write-off, the actual was 94%. That is the starting point. So, although we were planning to change the country, we had to address the macro issues first. You could not have had a sustainable Guyana, or because we were ranked by McIntyre as being poorer than Haiti. Sir Alistair McIntyre has been poorer than Haiti in that period when he did the report on Guyana. So that was crucial to address it, because there's no strategy for the future without sustainable macroeconomics. And interest rates were 40%. Imagine mortgage rates, 43, the president just told. Imagine 43%. You have to take a loan to build a home. In 2 years, your principal would double, basically. You couldn't build with that. The inflation rate was triple digit. The fiscal deficit was 25% of GDP. The balance of payment deficit was like 47% of GDP. So every 2 years to finance the BOP, you have to double the country's debt with the rest of the world. In every 4 years, if you have a fiscal deficit of 25% of GDP, you have to double the government's debt. It was a basket case. The PPP, through its leadership, up to 2050, when we left before oil, although we just found oil when we lost the elections. At that time, the debt to GDP ratio came down from 913% to about 40% of GDP, one of the lowest figures in the world before oil. And we were spending at that time about 10% of revenue to service debt. Today, it's even lower. The last time we checked, it was about 16% of GDP, one of the lowest figures in the world again, in spite of the borrowing, and we're using just about 5% of revenue to service debt. Again, one of the lowest figures anywhere in the world. And it will only get lower in the future. So you can rest assured that we are not short-term people. We don't do things for expedience, and we would not be able to fulfill any of these promises without us having a sound macroeconomic environment. None of the promises can be fulfilled. Interest rates have come down. Look at where the private mortgage rates are. He's been a fierce campaigner for this since he was minister. Mortgage rates now lower than even in the US in some cases. And the same thing with the inflation rate, etc. Single digit inflation, even through COVID. So that's the one important thing that you can expect from us, a continuation of some macroeconomic management. So what will happen, just sitting here writing, that our economy has changed a bit now. We have the oil and gas sector. So the traditional management tools that we use have to be enhanced, because now we run the risk of having the Dutch disease because of the windfall revenue. So you need to be very careful and deliberate in how you manage this, because other countries have not done so. That is why they destroy their economies, as the president said. Venezuela, others. They splurge, they change relative prices, they kill the other sectors of the economy by this change in relative prices because of the exchange rate policy when it appreciates. And then before you know it, your entire country is relying on revenue only from one sector. And then, when that happens, because with any resource industry, it's very volatile on the world market. So prices collapse there, the whole country, the economy collapses. The president has been aggressive in laying out the diversification plan, the focus on agriculture, the creative industries, the services sector, the connection with Brazil, all to create new growth poles that will create the wealth of the future. So we are already working on a post-oil and gas economy and a diversified economy, although we are just starting to produce oil and gas. Some countries have been producing oil and gas for 75 years, and they don't have a post-oil and gas strategy. We already started working on that because that's important to sustain any future prosperity. It's important so that the prosperity doesn't become periodic or ephemeral, it disappears one day, that it's sustained for generations to come. And so you can expect that to happen in the next 5 years. Continued work on ensuring this. Our taxation policy now will evolve. You heard the president mention lower taxes to increase more disposable income to people. But there are several principles that have guided us in, again, addressing taxation. So one is more money in people's pocket. Two is that it has to be family friendly, and we've started orienting the taxation system to support families. That is why now we are introducing allowances, and that will only go for people with families, children, etc. It has to incentivize economic activities. So the poultry industry, the fisheries industry, the miners would see a favorable taxation policy. The rice farmers, every industry would see that, because our taxation system was not penalized the wealth creation. It was incentivized the manufacturing sector. That is what we focus on. Imagine they were putting taxes on pesticides, fertilizer, on equipment for miners, or if you were agriculture or a manufacturing industry, you bring in a factory, you have to pay a VAT. That is what. So the taxation system would evolve to do that. Then it would also evolve to reward hard work. If people put in more effort, they must keep more of their money. And that is why we are putting an allowance now for overtime, for second jobs, etc. So that is the principle that guides us. We're not working on the basis of one day waking up and doing things. We're underpinned by a vision, a set of principles. And these are the things that would guide our taxation policy in the future. Our borrowing policy, we don't borrow to eat. We borrow to invest in the future. It's either for capital formation in two sectors. In the economic sector, so roads, bridges, etc., that will create greater wealth or support the creation of greater wealth. And secondly, in social infrastructure. That's our schools and hospitals, etc. It is our hope that in the future, as we get more revenue, we'd have to borrow less to finance the program because the budget will be supported more from revenue. So like the entire East Bank Road here, the Heroes Highway, we're funding from the budget. There is no borrowing here. Or the road across in Region 3 from Crane to the bridge. That's budget. Money is spending here, revenue. So sometimes when you see the big increase in the budget, it's for a specific purpose. So our borrowing policy will be attenuated, but we have the capacity to borrow without burdening future generations. But it doesn't mean that because we have that capacity, we borrow to consume as happened here. They were declared uncreditworthy in 1989 it was. Because they were just borrowing to sustain the importation. Not because at that time there was no capital formation. They were not investing in the areas. So you will see that. In our fiscal policy will support more what I just said. And then that will create, as the President said, more space for the private sector. Because if we can fund more of our activities, we'll not be crowding out the private sector from the domestic banking system. When that happens, interest rates tend to come down because the state can finance its own activities and it will be less inflationary. So these are just some of the things. I'm not going to go through the exchange rate policy. You see it now. The exchange rate policy will support the key objectives of ensuring that we don't go down the route of the Dutch disease. But at the same time, we must have enough resources to support legitimate transactions for our people. And we have that capacity. We have to make sure that we have a better management of it and that we look at all that it's not being exploited. We have a liberal financial system. We have an open financial system. Most of the Caribbean countries have exchange controls. We don't have exchange control in Guyana. And some are now capitalizing on this to finance their economic activities. Now, some of that will happen, but we can't be funding a second country's economic activity. We want to keep our resources to fund our own growth and development here in Guyana. So that's how we exchange. So I was just looking at some of the things that the President just mentioned. So responsible management of the economy, that's one. The creative and sustainable management of natural resources, another big head. So the first big head is responsible management of our economy, ensuring a post-oil and gas economy with new growth goals to create the wealth of the future, that we invest in that, sustain prosperity. Second big head is creative and sustainable management of natural resources. We have abundant natural resources. So we, from our, natural and other resources. our fisheries, but also our forests, our mines, everything. The whole management of natural resources. When the LCDS was launched, we did it. We set out a framework. But why I said creative? Because we're one of the few countries that have been able to monetize the safeguarding of our national patrimony, because we linked it to a global objective. And therefore, we're using those resources now to transform our country. The $750 million we earned from the sale of 30% of our forest carbon, 20% has gone to the Amerindian communities already, transforming the lives of people in those communities, 240-something communities. But the rest of the money is being spent right here safeguarding us against climate change, because we are now funding adaptation measures along the coast. Hope-like canals, several in Berbice, etc., hookers, pumping capacity. So you, your families, your businesses don't have, when what is already inevitable, that you don't lose the entire rice crop or the sugar industry, or your homes get flooded out because of the variable and intense weather patterns that we now experience. So that's why I said creative. We're the only party that has been able to do that. Set out a framework and then use creativity to fund a lot of what other countries are looking for funding for and can't find, because they are fiscally stressed budgets. We've been able, without recourse to the Treasury, to be able to finance and safeguard our country in that regard. So that's the second big head. The third big head is massive investment in human capital, and I don't need to elaborate on that. The education, the health, in our people generally. The third big head, the President mentioned it, is keeping our communities clean and safe. Garbage and security cameras and proper policing, from keeping them safe. People not now worry that, when they go to work, someone is jumping into their home and stealing what they earn for all the time, and then keeping our borders intact. So major investment in security, both to keep our country's borders intact and then our communities safe. So I was just scribbling here. The next one, big head, is ensuring equity in the distribution of resources. So that's why we're looking at the inclusion, people living with disability, the indigenous communities that are away from the coast, the rural-urban divide, moving resources to rural areas that and services that they can't experience now because they live far from the city, connecting people in that regard, with roads and services. So a big area is that, and then the President already mentioned supporting the religious community, which it's also using them to advance a lot of the reduction in disparity in the distribution of wealth. But the state will always use the principle of equitable distribution. Doesn't mean equal, equitable distribution of wealth. So look at it. The next big area is accountability at every level. The President mentioned the judiciary and the branches in the government and efficient government. So accountability and efficiency. We have to introspect how we deliver services to people. The judiciary has to be much more accountable. The President has done something never done before. Look at the complement of judges. It's increased that significantly. Now, if you look at the resources going to the judiciary, the salaries there, they're competitive like with anywhere else. And we now need to see the fair and fast adjudication of cases. And the excuses should disappear. Police accountability. Too often, we take the heat for unaccountable police inaction. But I don't want to disparage policemen, but they've made a they've done a great job in keeping our country safe. And sometimes the occasional bad things that happen cloud everything, the successes they have made. But clearly, accountability and a focus on efficiency in government delivery. President mentioned again, pensions. Rather than every pensioner having to come, you get the pension paid into your account. The cash grant in the future get paid somewhere else. Then the next big help is the creation of opportunities for all Ghanaians at every level, rich and poor. And then supporting them through the development bank, through education, through other means, good policies, to take advantage of the wealth creation. We want every Ghanaian to get wealthy. Whether you have nothing now or you're a big businessman, we want everybody to grow. And then, of course, the long-term planning for the oil and gas sector. I don't want to go on too long because you've done a thing here. It's just a framework. I want every one of you to understand what you see in that flyer can be read in isolation from the framework that guides us. We didn't map out the entire framework in the flyer, but I think we may need to do that in the final product when the manifesto comes up. So this is your reading this, the flyer, in conjunction with what I just said. I want to thank all of you again for being here. We really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, General Secretary.